Have you ever been rejected? Not because you were wrong, but simply because you didn't look the way someone imagined. That's exactly what happened to Elina Brooks, a 32-year-old black schoolteacher from Boston, who left behind everything she knew to pursue a fresh start in the quiet town of Silver Ridge, Wyoming. Tired of the constant discrimination in the city and drawn to the warmth of heartfelt letters exchanged over 6 months, Elina had poured her hopes into a mail-order courtship with Gregory Marsh, a 46-year-old merchant seeking companionship. Their written words spoke of dreams, values, and shared loneliness. But none of that prepared her for the humiliation waiting on the platform. When Elina stepped off the train in her best dress, carrying a suitcase full of books and dreams, Gregory took one look at her and recoiled, stunned not by who she was, but by the color of her skin. Elina stood on the platform at Silver Ridge Station, her posture graceful, her suitcase polished, and her Sunday best hat positioned just right, a picture of quiet hope and dignity. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times during her long train ride from Boston. The man she had exchanged letters with for half a year would greet her with flowers, perhaps a smile, and together they'd begin a new chapter. But as soon as Gregory Marsh saw her, his face paled and he took a full step back, as though her presence had somehow violated an unspoken rule. "You should have said something," he muttered, eyes darting around the station like a man trying to hide. Elina didn't need him to finish the sentence. She knew exactly what he meant. "Said what, Mr. Marsh?" she asked calmly, though her heart pounded. "That I'm black?" Gregory looked away, shame mingled with fear. "You have to understand," he stammered, lowering his voice. "This town, it's not used to people who look like you. My business, my name, it's complicated." His words landed like ice water on skin, each one colder than the last. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled bill and a train schedule. "Look, I'll pay for your ticket back. No hard feelings. You're clearly educated. You'll find something better." The insult, cloaked in politeness, stung deeper than if he had shouted. Elina stood frozen, not in confusion but in disbelief, at how swiftly affection could turn to cowardice, how quickly dignity could be dismissed with money. Then from behind Gregory, a voice rang out, deep and firm. "Is that how we solve things here, Marsh? Pay people to disappear when they don't match your expectations?" The man who spoke stepped forward with quiet authority. He wore denim jeans, worn boots, and a weathered button-down. But everything about his bearing, his stride, his voice, the way others subtly stepped aside, spoke of influence. His name was Lucas Hayward, a local legend in Silver Ridge. A fourth-generation rancher, Lucas owned nearly half the land in the county and had built his fortune with both grit and vision. While others whispered about his wealth, they also respected his independence. He glanced at Elina and nodded once, as if to acknowledge her presence, before returning his gaze to Gregory. "You've got a lot of nerve," Lucas said, his tone sharp but controlled, "inviting someone across the country and then turning your back the second she arrives. She deserves better than a handful of bills and a coward's apology." Gregory mumbled something about misunderstanding and community standards, but his voice trailed off. Elina, still standing tall, looked between the two men, one shrinking under the weight of his own prejudice, the other holding his ground like a mountain. Lucas turned to her. "Miss Brooks," he said gently, "I have a guest house on my ranch. It's not much, but it's safe, and it's yours if you'd like some time to figure things out." His offer wasn't just generous, it was defiant. In that moment, Silver Ridge's unspoken rules were being challenged, and Elina knew instinctively this town, and perhaps this man, held more stories yet to unfold. Lucas's offer was unexpected, and Elina didn't accept it lightly. Years of experience had taught her that kindness from strangers, especially powerful white men, often came with strings attached. But the alternative was sleeping in a cold station with no money, no plan, and no way home. So she agreed, cautiously, and followed Lucas to the Hayward Ranch. What she found was not just a refuge, but a place of surprising dignity. The guest house was modest but clean, overlooking acres of windswept pastures and golden fields that stretched to the edge of the horizon. Lucas and his small staff treated her not as a burden, but as a guest. He asked no intrusive questions, offered no false sympathy, and most notably, made no assumptions. For the first time in months, maybe years, Elina felt space to breathe. Days passed, and her curiosity about the land grew. Lucas gave her free rein of the estate, including the sprawling Hayward Library, a high-ceilinged room lined with leather-bound volumes, maps, and dusty ledgers dating back over a century. It was there, one stormy afternoon, that Elina's instincts as a history teacher and amateur legal scholar began to stir. She had always believed that land tells stories, if you know how to read them. As she pored over old plats, deeds, and hand-sketched property maps, she noticed something strange. Overlapping boundaries, conflicting ownership claims, and several parcels marked with the initials JF. Names she didn't recognize in the current Silveridge registry. One name kept surfacing: Joseph Freeman. It appeared on multiple documents as a legitimate landholder from the post-Civil War Reconstruction era. Elina dug deeper, cross-referencing names and timelines with the town's published history. What she uncovered was staggering. In 1872, a coordinated fire had swept through what had once been the Freeman homestead, driving the black family off the land under threat of violence. Within months, that land had been redistributed, quietly without official retraction, to local white settlers, including the ancestors of Gregory Marsh. These weren't just clerical inconsistencies, they were evidence of theft, buried under generations of silence. Elina's hands trembled as she held the fragile paper, not just from the weight of what she had found, but from what it meant. The very people who had mocked her presence in Silver Ridge, who had tried to push her out, were living on stolen legacy, on land that had once belonged to someone who, like her, had dared to start over. It wasn't just personal anymore. This was a matter of justice. Lucas noticed her late nights in the library, the quiet intensity behind her eyes, but he didn't pry. When he asked once if she was okay, Elina simply replied, "I'm learning a lot about this town." He gave her a knowing nod. What neither of them said aloud, yet both seemed to sense, was that Silveridge wasn't the quiet, law-abiding town it pretended to be. And Elina Brooks, who had arrived as a humiliated outsider, was slowly becoming the keeper of a truth that could upend everything. The question now wasn't whether she would act, but how. Elina's quiet research soon transformed into a mission. She began cross-referencing the name Joseph Freeman with census data, court records, and archived newspaper clippings from surrounding counties. Each late night in the Hayward Library unearthed a deeper truth, one that connected not only to Silver Ridge's tainted land history, but directly to her own bloodline. After weeks of careful digging, the full picture came into focus. Joseph Freeman, the man who had legally owned much of the valley in the 1860s, was Elina's great-great-grandfather. His land had been confiscated under duress, and his name erased from town records after the 1872 arson attack that forced his family to flee. Elina, stunned, realized she was not only uncovering history, she was reclaiming her legacy. The original deed, signed and notarized in 1866, along with family correspondences and burial records, left no doubt about her direct descent. But that wasn't all. In a bundle of documents sealed in a faded envelope marked to be opened upon proof of heirship, Elina discovered something even more unexpected. A legal trust fund, valued in modern terms at over $4.3 million, created by Joseph Freeman's former employer, a Union Army officer turned philanthropist, intended to support his descendants if they ever came forward with proof of land ownership and lineage. That trust had sat dormant for over a century, untouched, unnoticed, and growing. To claim it, Elina would have to formally validate the land theft in court. Meanwhile, whispers about her and Lucas began spreading like wildfire through Silver Ridge. Some claimed she was manipulating him for wealth. Others said Lucas had lost his mind by housing a black woman on his land. At church picnics, school meetings, and town council lunches, her name became a subject of hushed debate. Lucas, to his credit, remained unbothered in public. But Elina noticed the tension mounting. The influential families, those with the most to lose, began confronting Lucas directly, urging him to reconsider the optics of his hospitality. One even threatened to pull water access from a Hayward-owned irrigation channel if Elina didn't leave the ranch. Lucas didn't flinch. He told them plainly, if history makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's time you rethink your part in it. But Elina knew it wouldn't end there. These people weren't just protecting land. They were protecting a version of history that served them, and she was threatening to rewrite it. The choice now was clear. She could quietly walk away, take her inheritance, and start fresh elsewhere. Or she could stay, file suit, and bring the truth to light, even if it meant making powerful enemies. As she stood in the sunlit doorway of the Hayward Library, documents clutched to her chest, she thought of her ancestors, of how many times they'd been forced to give up, to disappear, to start over in silence. This time would be different. This time the story wouldn't be buried. It would be telling. And Silveridge, whether it was ready or not, would finally have to listen. The tension inside Silveridge's town hall was electric. Every seat filled with townspeople, landowners, and members of the city council, all abuzz with speculation over what they'd been summoned to witness. Elina stood at the front of the room, calm but resolute, her voice clear and unwavering, as she opened her leather briefcase and began laying out documents one by one. Yellowed deeds, hand-drawn maps, notarized letters, and a faded copy of the 1866 land grant signed by the state governor. She explained each artifact methodically, tracing the rightful ownership of the valley land back to her great-great-grandfather, Joseph Freeman, and presenting the legal and genealogical evidence that confirmed her as his only living heir. The room murmured, uneasy. Some scoffed, others folded their arms and frowned. But a few of the older townspeople exchanged quiet glances of recognition. One man, retired Judge Everett Carrington, slowly stood and cleared his throat. I remember my grandfather telling me about a black family that once lived on that land. Said they were forced out after a suspicious fire no one ever investigated. The room shifted. Gregory Marsh, red-faced and visibly shaking, suddenly leapt from his seat. "This is outrageous," he shouted. "It's a setup. These papers could have been forged." Before Elina could respond, the back doors opened and a man in a grey suit stepped forward, carrying a state-issued briefcase. "I'm Attorney Michael Tran with the Wyoming Office of Historical Records and Legal Claims," he announced. "Miss Brooks contacted our office weeks ago to begin a formal verification process. After a full review, we've confirmed the authenticity of every document in her possession. These aren't forgeries, they're state-recognized legal records." A stunned silence settled over the hall. Gregory tried to speak again, but found no words. Then Lucas Hayward, seated beside the counsel, rose to his feet and looked across the crowd. "Let me make one thing clear," he said, voice steady. "Miss Brooks didn't come here to steal land. She didn't come to embarrass anyone or dig up pain. She came here to correct an injustice so old most of you had the luxury of forgetting it ever happened. But she didn't forget. Her family didn't forget. And now we all have to remember." Some townspeople shifted uncomfortably, others avoided Elina's gaze. But there were nods too, small, slow, but growing. Lucas stepped closer to Elina, his voice now softer, but no less firm. "If Silveridge is the community we say it is, honest, hard-working, principled, then we don't get to pick and choose which parts of history we accept. Either we own the truth, or we become its prisoners." A wave of murmurs rippled across the room, and for the first time, the tide seemed to turn. Elina didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked each person in the eye, as if to say, "I am not here for revenge. I am here for restoration." And in that moment, the truth no longer belonged to the past. It belonged to everyone in that room. Despite having every legal right to claim the entire stretch of land that once belonged to her family, Elina made a choice that left the town speechless. Standing before the council weeks after the town hall meeting, she calmly laid out her proposal, not for repossession, but for restoration. Instead of seizing homes and farms from families who had unknowingly inherited stolen land, she suggested the creation of the Silver Ridge Heritage Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to serving the community. The foundation would be funded in part by the trust left by her ancestor and would reclaim specific parcels of disputed land, not to own, but to transform into something everyone could benefit from. Her plan included building a public school focused on inclusive history and civic engagement, a rural health clinic to serve underserved families, and a public library named after Joseph Freeman, where future generations could learn the true story of their town. She offered to co-chair the foundation with Lucas Hayward, whose unwavering support had made the entire journey possible. Some council members resisted at first, citing concerns about precedent, control, and image. But as weeks passed and town meetings were filled with residents both defending and reconsidering their pasts, the tone shifted. Slowly, opposition softened. In a final 5-2 vote, the council approved Elina's proposal. Construction began that summer, and as the first bricks of the new school were laid, something else quietly unfolded. Elina and Lucas's relationship deepened beyond alliance and into genuine love. Their wedding, held under the old oak tree on Hayward Ranch, drew both supporters and skeptics. A few prominent townspeople stayed home in protest, but dozens more came, not out of obligation, but respect. Elina wore a cream lace gown, once belonging to her grandmother, and Lucas stood proudly beside her in a tailored vest and boots, dusted with soil from the land they now tended together. Not as owner and outsider, but as equals. Their marriage sent ripples through Silver Ridge, not because of scandal, but because of the simple, undeniable power of what it represented. Reconciliation, truth, and the kind of unity built not on denial, but on hard-won understanding. For Elina, this wasn't just the end of a painful journey, it was the beginning of something bigger than she had ever imagined. She had arrived in Silver Ridge as a woman, seeking refuge from rejection. She had stayed to correct a generational wrong. But what she had built, alongside a man who had chosen principle over popularity, was a future not just for herself, but for an entire town. In the community garden outside the new Joseph Freeman Library, a plaque would later be installed that read, "In memory of what was lost, in honor of what was restored." It stood as a quiet reminder that healing isn't forgetting, it's choosing what comes next. And Elina Brooks Hayward had chosen, again and again, to lead with vision, not vengeance. Gregory Marsh quietly packed up his belongings and left Silver Ridge under the cover of nightfall, his reputation in tatters and his legacy irrevocably stained. No one threw stones or shouted as he disappeared down the highway. His punishment wasn't spectacle, it was silence. In contrast, Elina Brooks Hayward remained at the heart of a town she had helped transform. Not through conquest, but through clarity, compassion, and courage. Once humiliated at the train station, she was now the keynote speaker at local events, the subject of profiles in national magazines, and the face of a growing movement to confront historical land injustices across rural America. College students studied her legal strategy. Journalists documented her journey. Children in Silver Ridge grew up knowing her as the woman who turned the town's buried truth into a foundation for its future. And yet, Elina never sought fame. She remained rooted in her work, often seen walking the grounds of the new library with school children or sitting quietly beside Lucas during town council meetings. When asked in an interview what drove her, she simply said, "I wanted my great-grandfather's name to mean something again. And I wanted kids in this town, regardless of their color, to feel like they belong." Her story had become more than personal. It was symbolic, a blueprint for what justice could look like when approached with dignity instead of vengeance. It inspired similar claims in other small towns, sparked new conversations in churches and classrooms, and reminded an entire generation that the past doesn't disappear just because we refuse to talk about it. In time, Silver Ridge itself became known not just as a place that once tried to erase history, but as a place that learned how to face it. A monument was erected in the town square, not grand or ostentatious, but honest. A bronze sculpture of an open book resting on a stone plinth. On it, engraved in quiet defiance, were the words, "Truth builds, denial destroys." The lasting lesson of Elina's journey was clear and deeply American in its resonance. We are often taught to judge quickly, to categorize others based on appearance, accent, or ancestry. But Elina reminded us that the cost of such assumptions isn't just moral, it's generational. Gregory didn't simply reject a woman, he rejected a legacy, a leader, and a future that could have been his to share. In contrast, Elina, though wounded, chose to build instead of burn. She taught that justice, at its highest form, is not about humiliating the oppressor, It's about restoring the dignity of the oppressed in a way that benefits everyone. True justice creates opportunity not just for those wronged, but for those willing to do right. Her life became proof that healing does not require erasure of history, but rather the courage to rewrite it honestly. And perhaps most powerfully, Elina reminded us that power doesn't always wear a suit or come with a title. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a woman with a suitcase, a teacher's eye for truth, and a heart strong enough to carry the dreams of those who came before. Her legacy isn't just found in land deeds or library shelves, but in the quiet shift of a town that now knows better. In a world still wrestling with prejudice, Elina's story offers a clear, enduring call. Do not underestimate the quiet ones. They are often the architects of change. If this story moved you, if Elina's quiet strength, unwavering dignity, and fight for justice reminded you that true power comes from standing firm in the face of rejection, then you've just experienced the kind of story we share every day on X Daily Stories. Stories not just of survival, but of transformation. Stories where the underestimated become the undeniable. Where truth, no matter how long buried, finds its voice and changes everything. At X Daily Stories, we believe that storytelling isn't just entertainment, it's empowerment. Our channel is a home for powerful narratives that shine a light on injustice, celebrate resilience, and inspire meaningful change in everyday lives. From courtroom reckonings to small-town revolutions, we're here to remind you that one person, with heart, courage, and truth, can change the course of a community. So if you're ready for more stories like this, stories that make you think, feel, and believe again in what's possible, hit that subscribe button now and turn on the notification bell. Join our growing family of changemakers, truth seekers, and story lovers. Because the next story might just be the one that changes you. This is X Daily Stories. Real voices, real power, real impact.